Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, Assalamualaikum, and welcome to the Harborne Islamic Study Circle, HISC Seerah session 185. So, probably our penultimate one, talking about the Battle of Hunain. Perhaps next week we'll wrap it all up, but I'll see how much we can get through today. So, just to recap last week, although today we're going to talk about the distribution of the war booty. Last week was the siege of Taif, where the Prophet, when he's entering into Makkah, he suspects that he might need to launch an offensive against Taif. So he dispatches a couple of his Sahabi, Urwa ibn Masud, and another to learn the arts of siege warfare. So he's pre-planning, and then obviously they didn't expect the Hawazin and Banu Thaqif to come and take the fight to the Muslims. So it was, so when they found out that they were amassing these 20,000 pagans, obviously these Sahabi came back with information on how to deal with the siege. So we talked about the siege. But before the Prophet ﷺ left for the siege, having routed the Hawazin and chased them off, all of the spoils of war were put in the valley of Al-Jiranah, which we'll talk about later today, and the Muslims headed off to Taif, following on from the advance party, the vanguard battalion that Khalid bin Walid had led to make sure that the people of Taif stay there. But Taif, we talked before about its unique geography. It's on an elevated plain, a hill plateau area. It's got its own sort of microclimate, and they have stockpiles of food and armaments that can last them many months, and some say a year or so. So the Muslims, they got there, they camped, but as soon as they camped, they came under heavy fire from the arrows, so the artillery fire from the arrows. So they had to relocate the camp out of the distance of the arrows. So then Prophet he's laying siege, and then he's having to it's a new type of warfare for them. So they're having to try to use these new tactics, build the machines. So they build a traction trebuchet, a catapult or a mangonel. They built a wooden tank or a testudo, in Arabic a dababa, which is sort of a wooden covering that you can go underneath and protected from the hot oil that's doused on you from the walls. They did a battering ram. They also later on in the siege cut down some of the vines and the crops. They offered freedom for the slaves, and some of the noblemen and a few slaves climbed down the tree, climbed down the walls in the night. But despite all these efforts, after 2 or 3 weeks, the Muslims, they breached one of the walls, but as soon as they breached that, they got attacked by the burning oil. And then as they come out from under the sort of wooden tank, they get fired on by the arrow. So they actually sustained a lot of casualties, significantly more casualties in the siege than in the Battle of Hunain. So the Prophet, after 2 or 3 weeks, he seeks the technical advice of Nawfal bin Muawiyah ad-Dawli, who suggests that we should lift the siege, and talks about a fox being in a hole. So the Prophet said, look, let's go back, but the people want to fight. And then the Prophet says, okay, fine, tomorrow morning go ahead and fight if you want. And then really bitter fighting the next day, and they all come back battered and bruised. And the Prophet makes makes the same announcement through Umar bin al-Khattab, that tomorrow morning we're going to go back, and the people say nothing, and Prophet he laughs, And then the people come to the Prophet and say, can you make dua against the people of Taif for all that they've done against us? Having, the started the war, the heavy casualties they've taken, as well as they all know the story of how the Prophet was chased out of Taif. So the Prophet, he stands up in front of everyone, raises up his hands and makes dua to Allah to forgive the people of Taif and bring them, give them guidance and bring them closer to Islam. And so demonstrating his mercy. War is not about defeating your enemy. The war, the Prophet, it's about spreading Islam. It's about bringing people closer to Islam. It's not about punishing people, and that's not what Islam's about. It's about softening the hearts and bringing them closer to Islam. And then we finished off by talking about some of the other lessons in as far as it's permissible to adopt aspects of science and technology that don't obviously conflict with your ideology, because these are universal tools almost that can be adopted without having an ideological aspect to them. They're purely just tools, and they're not arisen out of a particular philosophy or way of life. So we're allowed to adopt technology and science, but we're not allowed to adopt different philosophies and ways of life. And then there's an important distinction there. And then we also talked about how the Prophet used psychological warfare and how he did shura to try and work out what to do next. So that's some of what we talked about last time. There was also a couple of things which I forgot to mention, a couple of other hadith during the fighting. The Prophet said that whoever shoots an arrow and it reaches its target will be raised one level in Jannah. And there's one person who was listening to this and he goes, by Allah, I shot 16 arrows and they all hit the mark. And so he was given the glad tidings of having his station raised 16 times in Jannah. And again, if you want, you can extrapolate to modern day warfare in terms of you're not going to be shooting arrows, we'll be shooting other things. So it's not just wildly shooting in the air, it's got to be purposeful and appropriate. And some scholars say one of the other famous hadith where the Prophet says, whoever grows one grey hair fi sabilillah, that will be light for him in the day of judgment. So whether that's the intensity of the fighting, greying your hair in a metaphorical sense, or just generally, if you grow old in Islam and you have grey hair, that will be light for you on the day of judgment. And obviously that pertains to crossing of the Sirat. So another couple of stories now that the Prophet ﷺ, he's laid the siege, he's come back from the siege, so they've defeated the Hawazin, they've gone for the siege, that's lasted 2 or 3 weeks, and now they're back to Al-Jiranah, where the valley where all the captives are and all the spoils are. So it took to over 6,000 captives, some say 6,500 women and children, 24,000 camels, over 40,000 sheep, and 4,000 ounces of silver. So, we're talking multi-million pound war booty in today's modern equivalents. So the Prophet, he's coming back, and then as he's back, some say this happened a bit earlier, but other narrations say it happened when he came back from Taif. One of the captives amongst the women, she's causing a bit of a fuss, and they go and find out why you're causing such a fuss. And her name was Shaima, and she is the daughter of Al-Harith, Sadia, and she says, "Get your hands off me! Stop treating me like this! Don't you know who I am? I am the sister of your own companion." And then they sort of look really amazed at her. She goes, "I am Muhammad's foster sister." And again, the Sahabi, they're just shocked. They don't know what to do. This is just news to them. They've not come across this before, because obviously they all know him to, know aspects of his early life and story. But they've, as I say, this was news to them. So they take Shaima to the Prophet ﷺ. And then she comes and they say that, "We've got someone who claims to be your sister." And then, the Prophet says, "Fine, bring her here." And then she's presented to the Prophet ﷺ, and she goes, "I'm Shaima." And so the Prophet ﷺ, he is now about 60 years old. So he's about 60, and or just over 60. And this is Shaima, the foster sister that he had in the desert when he was, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years old. And so the Prophet obviously hasn't seen her for over 55, 56 years. So he goes, "Well, how do I know it's you? Maybe you heard of these stories and you're just saying that to get out of being captive." And she goes, so he basically says, "Prove it to me." So she goes, "Well, I've still got the mark on my back, which you bit me with when I was carrying you when you were young." So obviously, she's a few years older than him, and she was carrying him on the back, and then he bit her on the back, and she says, "I've still got that mark on my back." And the Prophet, he laughed, and obviously he then realized that, yes, this is Shaima. And he gave her respect, asked her to sit down, said, "Look, I've got two choices for you. Either you can stay with us and I can treat you very honorably, or I can give you some gifts and you can go back to your tribe." And it said that she chose to go back to her tribe. In another book of Seerah, it's mentioned that Shaima then she went back and she brought back her mother and father. So her mother is Halima, and we talked about Halima many months ago, many years ago now. And Halima and Halima's husband, which were the Prophet's foster parents. And if you remember the story, how after the Prophet was born, they're looking for foster mothers from the Bedouin tribes, and because he's an orphan, none of the other families want to foster the Prophet because he's an orphan, he's not going to pay well, and in the end, Halima, she says, I don't want the disgrace of going back empty-handed, and her husband says, "Why don't you take the orphan child?" And she takes the orphan child, and then their luck turns, and Allah blesses them, with goats, with milk, etc., and they had a good time. So much so that they wanted to keep the Prophet for an extra 2 years when their initial sort of fostering time period was over. So Halima, so the Prophet was about 60, so Halima would be maybe about 80, late 70s, early 80s at this time. And it said that when Shaima brought in Halima and her father, the Prophet, he stood up for them both, and he took off his own cloak, and then he put it on the ground for Halima to sit, and then it's a very honourable thing to do in that culture, but it's not specifically mentioned whether they became Muslim or not. But that's as I say, that's another story related to this incident of the war booty. So the Prophet, he's collected all the war booty. He's placed it in the valley. He had the valley protected by armed guards whilst they were gone away for 2-3 weeks, because obviously that's a lot of wealth. So he needed to have a proper security around that, and you've got 6,000 captives, and we're talking about the camels, 24,000 camels, 40,000 sheep, 4,000 silver ounces. It was guarded by Masud bin Amr al-Ghifari, and the Prophet returns from Taif, and then he's basically just waiting for Hawazin to come back and claim their property. He doesn't do anything straight away. He's staying there, and he's waiting for over a week for the tribe of Hawazin to come back. Maybe they'll send a delegation. Maybe they'll change their mind, because Malik bin Auf, we said how naive he was, that he brought everything with him. All of this, the women, the children, all their wealth, their animals, etc., because he thought that would help the fighters, motivate them to fight. So now the Prophet, he's got all of that. Well, he's thinking, well, obviously, they've lost everything. The tribe have lost everything. All they have now are just the menfolk, and everything else the Prophet has got. So he's thinking, perhaps they'll see sense and they'll come back, and because everybody knows the way these things go. It's common knowledge now in the Arabian Peninsula. If you become Muslim, you get all your stuff back. It's not about punishing you. It's about bringing you closer to Islam. So you can think about you can think of it as incentivizing people, or bribing them, or softening their hearts. And so the Prophet, he's waiting, but then a week goes by, 7-8 days go by, and the Hawazin do not send a delegation. And then there's murmurings amongst his own people, because they're just sat around. And so they start demanding their share of the war booty. And we know this, that the Prophet did this before when he married Juwayriya, when the whole tribe, Banu Mustalik, they were taken as captives. Juwayriya is the daughter of the chieftain. She was taken as captive. She married the Prophet ﷺ. Then the chief of Banu al-Mustalik, he comes back, and the Prophet ﷺ says, you can have everything, and back, as it were, now that you've become a Muslim. And so, he goes back with all the men, women, and children, apart from his daughter, who's obviously married to the Prophet ﷺ, and they all go back as Muslims, and he goes back, and he's still chief of the tribe. So the Prophet ﷺ, he's done this. There's and people know this precedence, but Hawazin, they take too long to do this, and we'll come on to the fact that when they finally do come, it's a bit too late. So then the Prophet ﷺ, he has to start dividing the war booty, and as I said, there's nothing wrong with incentivizing people. One of the categories of zakat that we have still today is you can give it to people whose hearts need to be brought closer to Islam. So it's a well-recognized phenomenon, and we sometimes find that people, they may enter Islam for the wrong reason. It's not because they firmly are convinced of Islam as the truth. They may marry or they may convert for marriage. They may convert for money. They may convert for other reasons. But then what tends to happen is that they will then study more, and oftentimes and I've seen this, that they will become more intense and stronger believers than people who are born into the faith, because it's an active process for them. They were far away from Islam. They're brought into Islam for potentially superficial reasons. Then they decide to study it, or what it's about, and they become very convinced and they become very committed. And again, that's a pattern certainly we see here in the UK and other Western countries quite a lot. So the Prophet, he has to start giving out the spoils. So he essentially just gives it out to all the chiefs of the Quraysh. So he calls Abu Sufyan bin Harb, who just converted on the morning of the conquest of Makkah. And even when the Battle of Hawazin, Battle of Hunain started, he thought that, well, actually this is it now, and so you can see that the Muslims are going to get defeated here. Ibn Abbas talked about how he likes status and he likes pomp and he likes to feel important. So the Prophet turned to him first and gave him 100 camels and 40 ounces of silver. So again, it's incentivizing him, bringing him closer to Islam and showing the generosity of Islam. So Abu Sufyan, 100 camels, it's a lot. It's probably more than what he owned, definitely more than what he owned before. And one other thing to mention before this is at the end of the battle, the Prophet went to Safwan ibn Umaiyah and said, this is the battle of Hunain. He went to Safwan ibn Umayyah and said, because he borrowed some armor from Safwan. Safwan was given 4 months to become a Muslim, because he fled, and then he was convinced to come back, and he came back on the horse and he saw the people praying, and he said, I hear that you're not going to kill me, and that you can forgive me. And the Prophet says, fine. He goes, let me think about Islam. And he said, give me 2 months to think. And the Prophet says, I'll give you 4 months. So we're still in those 4-month period. Safwan, the Prophet borrowed some armor for the Battle of Hunain. And Safwan said, are you taking it, or are you borrowing it? And the Prophet says, no, we're borrowing it. And if we lose any, then I will personally pay and recompense you for any that get lost. When they're tallying up after the battle, Prophet comes to Safwan, says, we're missing some pieces, tell me how much it is, and then I'll recompense you. And Safwan says, okay, no, just leave it now, because I feel myself coming closer to Islam. He still hasn't become a Muslim, but he says, look, that doesn't matter. I'm not gonna enforce that. My heart is melting a bit, but I'm not quite there yet. So then now, he knows that. So he's given Abu Sufyan 100 camels. And then Abu Sufyan, and again, you can see his mentality. He then says, well, what about my son Yazid? And again, and these are names that we'll know from our history, Yazid and Muawiyah, because they started the Umayyad dynasty. And so Abu Sufyan goes, well, what about my son Yazid? What about his share? So the Prophet gave him the equivalent share. And then Abu Sufyan said, well, what about my other son, Muawiyah, my second son? What about his share? The Prophet said, okay, fine, take his share as well. So, Abu Sufyan, he got a lot of money. So he's probably feeling really pumped up and quite proud about that. And then Hakeem bin Hizam, another one of the chiefs, he was given 100 camels. But then Hakeem, possibly because he'd seen what Abu Sufyan had done, he goes, well, give me some more. And then the Prophet says, okay, fine, gives him another 100. And he goes, well, give me some more. The Prophet gives him some more. And then he goes for a 4th time, give me some more. And then the Prophet then sort of probably sighed and said to him, Ya Hakeem, this money is sweet, it's luscious, it's green, right? It's beautiful. And whoever takes it with an open and generous heart, Allah will give him blessings. But whoever takes it wanting more out of greed, then this is like the one who keeps on wanting but is never satisfied. So basically saying, look, be thankful for what you have. Don't be greedy for the sake of being greedy, because there's no blessings in that. So so then when Hakeem heard that, he said, Ya Rasulullah, I won't. From now on, I vow I will not ask anything from anybody. And he was true to his word. He didn't ask anything from anybody after that. So, he got to keep what he was given, but, he, as I say, he realized that he potentially was doing it out of greed. Now we came to Safwan ibn Umaiyah. He's given 100 camels, and then another 100, and then he's given 300 camels. So he's given 100, and then the Prophet says, is that okay? And he sort of says, fair enough, can I have some more? Gives him 100, and he ends up again with 300, just like Hakeem and Abu Sufyan. And the Prophet says, just, he's asking for more, he gives him more. He asks him more, he gives him more. And then Safwan, he narrates this hadith himself. He says, look, the Prophet kept giving and giving and until Islam entered my heart, right? And he said that he realized at that point that it's not possible for this man, the Prophet, it's not possible for this man to be a man of this world. Because which person who has all of this wealth would just freely give, just like that? You ask for it, he gives it. You ask, he gives. And he must be a prophet, because, by Allah, no one but a prophet would give like he's giving and think so little of the wealth. We're talking about tens of, hundreds of thousands of pounds worth, if not millions, each. And the Prophet was just giving it with no regard to himself. And then, Safwan says, Wallahi, the Prophet was the most despised person on earth to me, and again, we know how Umaiyah bin Khalaf was against the Prophet, and Safwan's grown up in that household where he's just surrounded by this propaganda against the Prophet, against the Muslim. He's reared his whole worldview is anti-Prophet, anti-Islam. That is all he knows. That's the propaganda he's grown up with, for the last 20 years. And so he's been thoroughly radicalized, indoctrinated by those ideas. And so he said, look, he admits it. Truly, the Prophet was the most despised person to me because of all that. But then because he continued to give and give until he became the most beloved to me, right? And again, it just shows that if we're generous with people, that can help bring people together. It softens the hearts. There's wisdom in this, that but by giving, being generous, you disarm people. And again, the Prophet, he encourages them when we, as Muslims, when we go visit people or when we meet people, we should give them gifts. Not out of obligation, but just because you're giving gifts. And then it's that exchange of gifts, that giving of gifts, that softens the hearts, brings people together. And that's really important. And then it said, the Prophet, he gave Al-Harith bin Kilda, who we talked about before, he gave him 100 camels. And then the other chiefs of the Quraysh, he gave them 100 camels. And then to others, he would give 50 camels. To others, he would give 40 camels, right? But then rumors started to spread amongst the people. As the Prophet, he's there, just, all of the Quraysh, the leaders of the Quraysh, they're getting 100, 200, all the 40, 50 camels, all the chiefs. Even the Muhajir were getting some of this distributed war booty. But then some people started to say, look, the ones who fled are being given, but the ones who fought are getting nothing. And we'll come back onto that because that sort of plays out a bit more strongly a bit later on. But the other thing is, the Prophet, because he's being so generous in his giving, another rumor starts to spread that Muhammad gives generously and fears not becoming poor. So this sort of basically his generosity became legend, so much so that all the tribes, all the people around, they started wanting a piece of the action. So they don't want to miss out. It's that fear of missing out syndrome. Everyone else, look at all these Quraysh, they're getting all the wealth. We need to get in there. We can't miss out on it. And so all the other sort of minor Bedouins and minor bit actors, they start gathering around the Prophet and demanding their wealth. So the Prophet, he gives as much as he can until he basically he's got no more. I mean, there's some famous little stories that sometimes we hear, certainly in the khutbahs, when the khutbahs used to happen pre-COVID. One of these Bedouin chiefs, because again, he's just, all he can see is money, money, money. He comes to the Prophet and he grabs him by the collar and says, and pulls the Prophet towards him. Right, grabs him by the collar, pulls him towards him, and says, "Give me some of my money that you're giving to all the others." The Prophet turned around to him, smiled, and said, "Give him some." Right, and then essentially he'd given away everything, and still the people are gathered around him, and they're sort of backing him into a corner, and they're sort of just and again, you some of you have seen it when you go to some areas and you're giving out money to the poor or giving out food to the poor, and they all rush, and they sort of rush around you and crowd you out, and rather than being in an orderly way, it becomes chaotic, and it can become quite scary. So this is it's narrated at one point that a lot of these chiefs, they're still gathering around the Prophet and you've given it to everyone else. Where's my share? And the Prophet, he's slowly backing off and backing off and backing off, and then he's backed onto some thorny bushes. So he's basically surrounded by these people. He's walking backwards, and he's sort of stumbled onto some thorny bushes, and the people are grabbing him, says, "Where's mine? Where's mine?" And then he understandably gets a bit irate with them, and he says, "Oh, people, give me back my garment." And again, so he's being grabbed by people, and then the thorny bushes is attaching onto the back of his garment. So he goes, "Oh, people, give me back my garment, for I swear by the one in whose hand is Muhammad's soul, that if I had as many numerous camels as there are Tihama trees, I would distribute them amongst you. You know quite well that I'm neither mean nor a coward nor a liar." Basically saying, look, it's I've given away anything. If I had anything more to give, I would give it to you. If all these trees around you were mine to give, and if they were camels, I'd give them to you, right? And then it said that he got to his camel, plucked a hair out of his camel's hump, held it between his two fingers, and lifted up and said, "O people, I swear by Allah that I get nothing but 1/5 of your booty, and this very fifth goes back to you." So it's the fifth that belongs to him that he himself is giving away. So the rules of war is that the emir or the Prophet, he gets a fifth of the booty, and of that fifth he's giving away. He's not touching the war booty that is sort of ring fenced for the fighters. We'll come on to that later. This is the rest of the war booty he's giving from his own personal wealth. And another couple of stories related to that. There was someone called, I think it was Umaiyah, who was given 50, and his cousin Akra was given more than him, and then so he gets a bit upset. I mean, I don't know exactly, I can't remember the exact details, but whether he was given less than 50 and his cousin was given 50, but he basically he got upset, and he wrote a poem that basically said, my father and his father, Umaiyah and Akra, they were equals, yet he gets 50 and I don't, right? And then and we talked about how poems are the main propaganda tool. That's how you tweet. That's how you trend. That's the way you get your message across. So he's made this poem. He's circulated amongst the people, and the news of the poem, and the poem gets back to the Prophet ﷺ. So the Prophet ﷺ, he then calls Umaiyah and says, "Is this what you've said?" And then he recalls the poem. The Prophet ﷺ, he recites the poem. And part of the poem, it says Akra, something Umaiyah, and then goes on to the rest of the poem. And then Abu Bakr, he corrects the Prophet ﷺ, says, no, actually, it's the other way around. The actual poem is Umaiyah before Akra, or the other way around. And the Prophet ﷺ says, no, but that's what I said. It says, no. Allah prevented you from being a poet, because if you're a poet, you would know that you can't transpose those two words. So the two words, when you're writing the poetry, the rhythm and the character of the verse depends on where each of the letters and the words are placed. As a non-poet, the Prophet ﷺ, he juxtaposed those two words. He swapped them over, and he didn't see that made any difference to the poem. But Abu Bakr, who is a poet, he said basically, no, actually, it makes a big difference, but you're not a poet, so you can't see it. And Prophet ﷺ, he just shrugged his shoulders and said, fine, I thought it's the same. And Abu Bakr says, no, it's not. But then the Prophet says, fine, just go and cut his tongue. Not literally meaning take his tongue out and cut it. It means stop him from having an excuse to spread this poem. So basically, he got his share bumped up. There was another one. There's someone called Amr bin Taghlib. He got less than some of his friends, and he noticed that, and he was quite sad, and the Prophet saw that. So the Prophet he went to Amr bin Taghlib, and he says, look, I give more to some people and fewer to others for a reason, because these people, they have greed in their hearts, so I will give them more. There are those who don't have greed in their hearts, who are more beloved to me, and I give them less because I trust in their iman. So Amr bin Taghlib, when he heard this, he said, I love that hadith more than 100 red camels. Basically, and a red camel is exceptionally rare. So basically saying, look, that was the most precious thing he ever heard, because what the Prophet ﷺ is basically saying is that you are beloved to me, and I don't need to give you these. Don't worry about yourself. Don't worry yourself about these other people. They're greedy. But you, because I love you and you're closer and dearer to me, I don't need the need to incentivize you like that. So again, the Prophet ﷺ, he knows the psychology of people. He knows there are those people who are greedy, who will be closer to Islam by giving them more. And he knows there are those people who have a deeper, more profound understanding of Islam, who will be closer to Islam by giving them less. I mean, wow. I mean, that's just fantastic. and the Prophet he understands that. And again, later on we'll talk about this, how he sent a message to Malik bin Auf, who was the cause of the Battle of Hunain, and said basically, you become a Muslim and you'll get all your property back. And he leaves Taif, he gets meets the Prophet, gets all his property back, and then he leads an army against Taif. Right? So the Prophet, he understands the psychology of people. There's also another interesting story that happened in the distribution, is that there's a man with a scraggly beard, and again, just pay attention to this. The man with a scraggly beard, quite disheveled, large forehead, came to the Prophet and in a sort of very rude and abrupt way said, Ya Muhammad. And again, if you're a Muslim, you're not allowed to address the Prophet as Muhammad. You have to say, Ya Rasulullah. So he goes, Ya Muhammad. And then he's sort of eyeballing the Prophet and says, fear Allah on this money. Right? So you've got this nobody from the desert coming to the Prophet and saying, fear Allah on this money. Be just with how you're giving out this money. And basically implying that the Prophet ﷺ is being unfair in how he's giving out this money. And the Prophet ﷺ, he just taken aback by it. He said, woe to you. Who will be just if I am not just on this earth? And basically, look, I'm the Prophet of Allah, right? If I'm not going to be just, who else is there left on this earth who can be just? And the Prophet was just blown away by that statement. Fear Allah on this money. And the man said, he dug his heels and said, look, this is a distribution you are not doing for the sake of Allah. And the Prophet, he retorts to him and says, will you not trust me when the one who is in the heavens trusts me? Right? And at that point, the man sort of, jerked the Prophet back, turned around and walked away in a harsh way. And then Umar bin al-Khattab, he looked at the Prophet and you can guess what he said. What did he say? Do you want me to kill him? He said, can I kill him? And the Prophet says, no. Woe to me. Because this is clear kufr. He's accusing the Prophet of being unjust. Right? And the Prophet says, no, woe to me if people start saying that I kill my own companions. So the general perception is that person must be a Muslim. And if I start killing people, that people think are Muslims, then I can't. Then the PR campaign will start against me. They're saying that I would kill my own companions. So because I want to avoid that. Woe to me if people start thinking I kill my own companions for his type, and he points at that man walking away. From his type, there will come a group of people that will recite the Qur'an but will not leave their throats. Right? As in they won't understand it. They have beautiful recitation, but it won't leave their throats. And you will think that their salah, their zakah, and their actions are better than yours. They do things with so much intensity, you think that they are better than you. Yet, they will leave Islam like an arrow that leaves its target once it's hit it. And they are the worst of people. And then he talks about how they will then be, from amongst them, one of their leaders will have his arm will have a floppy bit, just like a woman's breasts. And later on, when Ali ibn Abi Talib went to war with these Kharijites, they said that they went looking for the leader, and his arm was as the Prophet described it. But he said, look, when you've got a strong archer and he fires an arrow at the game or at a target, sometimes he fires it with so much force it goes straight through the game or goes straight through the target. And then when he then looks at the arrowhead, or the binding, or the shaft, or the feathers, there's no blood on them at all. It's just gone straight through, right? And he goes, these people will be like that, right? That, and then he describes that other hadith that they will kill the Muslims, but they will befriend the non-Muslims. And this sort of stuff happened, that they get so obsessed with certain minutiae of Islam that they forget about the bigger things in Islam. So they think nothing of killing other Muslims. And again, in the time of the Khulafa, they killed prominent Sahabi or the children of prominent Sahabi. And they thought nothing of it. And yet they would argue amongst themselves around minor things. Again, I'm not saying it's the same type of thing, but you've got people nowadays who are just so focused on gelatine or E471 or minute aspects of Islam. They forget the bigger Islam. They don't even pray or they don't fast, right? But they are just so focused on one thing, and they will be easy to call out others as kafir based upon that. And the Prophet is warning us against these types of people. So the final thing, I think, then to talk about, two final things to talk about. One is that the Prophet orders Zayd bin Thabit to fetch all the booty, summon the people, and then the booty according to the fighters were then distributed. So a footman would get 4 camels and 40 sheep. And the cavalry, the horsemen, would get 12 camels and 120 sheep. So we talked about the ratios before about that the horseman, the knight, gets an extra share compared to the foot soldier, because they've got more technical expertise and they've got the horse, and they're generally more proficient fighters. And so we'll finish off with a really famous story. And it's we talked about the rumors that were spreading around. And the Prophet, he got to hear that these the rumors, and basically people saying, by Allah, the Prophet is being talked back at by his own people, and basically they're saying that the Prophet, he's gone soft on his own people. He's looking after his own people. He's basically giving all the wealth to his relatives and to the people of Quraysh, and the Ansar were getting nothing. So in the distribution, the Prophet, he didn't give anything of the wider wealth that's being distributed to the Ansar. They got nothing. So Saad ibn Ubadah, who's the chief of the Ansar, he then he got to hear of these rumors, and obviously he's the chief, he knows what's going on. And then he came to the Prophet and said, "O Messenger of Allah, this group of helpers are very angry at you about the distribution of booty that you have won. You have given shares to your own kinsmen and forwarded lots of gifts to the Arab tribes, but this group has got nothing." The Prophet, he's sort of surprised, and he looks at Saad and he goes, "Well, what do you think of this?" And then Saad, again, very diplomatically, because he needs to have these answers questioned. He's the chief. He needs to represent his tribe. But he's also wondering, hang on a second, you're giving away all of that, but you're not. We're the ones who fought for you. And he goes, "O Messenger of Allah, you know that I am nothing but a member of my people." So essentially he's saying in a polite way, I need to have these questions answered as well. So the Prophet says, "Okay, fine, call all your people and bring them to this tent and exclude all others." So Saad went and he summoned all the Ansar, right? And they all gathered in this one tent or around the tent, and they prevented most of the Muhajir from that meeting. And so it's exclusively for the Ansar, as well as just a handful of elite Muhajir. Obviously, the people like Abu Bakr, Umar, and the really elite amongst the Muhajir. But all the other Muhajir were excluded. So it's a private audience, Prophet with the Ansar. So when they're there, they say, look, we've gathered together in compliance with your orders. What's the matter? So the Prophet ﷺ, he turns to the Ansar and he says, I've been told that you are angry with me. Didn't I come to you when you were astray and Allah guided you? You were poor and Allah gave you wealth. Weren't you enemies to each other and Allah made you love one another? So, he's basically turning it around them and said, look where you were just a decade ago. Look where you are now. You really angry with me? Didn't I come to you when you were astray? You were far from the straight path. That's what we pray for every time we, do namaz. We don't ask for wealth. We don't ask for honor. We ask for the straight path. And he goes, didn't I come to you when you were astray and Allah guided you to the straight path? Weren't you poor? And now look at the money you have. Weren't you enemies bitterly fighting each other, Aus and the Khazraj? Now look at you. So he's saying that to them, and then they say Allah and His Messenger are better and more gracious. So they're very humble. And then he said, well, what prevents you from replying to me? Replying to the Messenger of Allah, O Ansar. And they said, what should we reply? Messenger of Allah, while to the Lord, to His Messenger belong all the benevolence and grace. What do you want us to say? And so this is just mind-blowing. Prophet, he then turns around and says, but by Allah, you could have responded, and it would be true if you turned around to say, and I would testify to this, that you should say to me, you came to us belied and rejected, and we accepted you. You came to us helpless and we helped you. You were a fugitive and we took you in. You were poor and we comforted you. And so the Prophet said, look, if you said this, you would be perfectly right. This is touche. I've said that you were astray, etc. But you could have equally turned around, and there's full honesty and truth in that. You should have said to me that you were belied, rejected, and we accepted you. You were helpless and we helped you. You were a fugitive and we gave you a home. We took you, and you were poor and we comforted you. And the Prophet then turns to them and said, you, Ansar, do you feel anxious for the things of this world? Wherewith I have sought to incline these people to the deen, to the faith, in which you are already established. Are you just worried about these material things? Is that your concern? Are you not satisfied, O Ansar, that these people, they go back with sheep and camels while you go back with the Prophet? By him in whose hands is my life. If there hadn't been a hijrah, a migration, I would consider myself to be one of the Ansar. If all the people would go through a valley in a passage and the Ansar would go through another valley, I would go through the other valley with the Ansar. Allah have mercy on the Ansar, their children, and their children's children. And the hadith says they all wept until everyone's beards were wet. So it's just a lovely interaction with the Prophet and the Ansar. The Ansar obviously are very aggrieved, but the Prophet, he's just bringing them to, well, what's important? You have me, you have the deen. So what if they have a bit of money? If it brings them closer to Islam, well, then that's fine. You've got me. I'm coming back with you. And just think about that. And just think about, the greatness of that blessing. So then they said, we are satisfied with Prophet of Allah, with our share. So we'll finish there, inshallah. And then we'll carry on with some of the lessons from lessons from the Battle of Hunain and Taif. And then what happens when the Hawazin finally come. Now that everything's been distributed, a few days later, the Hawazin come and say, well, we want our family back. We want our wealth back. So what happens in that situation? Inshallah, do make dua for the Ummah and for us. And do take care. Hands, face, space, and air. Jazakallah khair. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Wallah sir innal insana lafi khusr illa alladhina amanu wa amilu salihati wa tawasaw bil haqq wa tawasaw bis sabr. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum.